Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives happening every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 12 on ebizradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime Series on all major podcast channels, and for our Lunchtime marketing segment, proudly supported by Hollard Insurance, hashtag big ads for small businesses. As per usual, joining us, our marketing and communications expert, Craig Page-Lee. How are you doing, Craig?
I'm well, and you, Kevin? Yeah, good. I see that you're in wonderful new environments.
Yes, we finally moved. We've moved out of Johannesburg to the countryside, and we literally have like one petrol station and one one little OK bazaars, and it's quite interesting. But at least we've got fiber. I'm like that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Quality of lifestyle.
Yeah, no, it's a nice big shift for us. So I'm really happy.
Brilliant.
Craig, so we covered a really important subject last week when we looked at the impact working from home is having on corporate culture and, speak of the devil, and what this means for organizations. What can you share with our listeners from last week's takeaway and insightful discussion?
Oh, Kevin, thanks. Yes. So, yeah, there you are working from home in a new location. As I mentioned last week, the topic is of great interest to me. Firstly, from trying to understand the impact work from home has on corporate real estate across the world, with the majority of corporate office buildings standing very much half empty, if not more, at this particular point. And then secondly, what are the long-term impacts and effect in corporate culture with workforces being so disparate and displaced and out of contact with each other for such prolonged periods of time? And so the key points that I want to reference as the takeaway from last week are from the article, How Have Organizational Culture Shifted During the COVID-19 Pandemic and What Might Need to Change Back. So as we mentioned, the article was produced by a collective of 7 individuals and was published on the 7th of July this year on cmrberkeley.edu, which is the California Management Review, which in turn is Berkeley Haas's premier management journal, and a great read. So the article covered the findings of the Berkeley Stanford Silver Linings study, and this aimed to identify patterns of culture change across the diverse range of the organization. So picking up on the three patterns that emerged, Kevin, the first pattern that emerged was that COVID pandemic led organizations to emphasize certain cultural elements and actually to downplay others, and that would be expected. But the 5 cultural elements that they actually placed greater emphasis on were flexibility, transparency, supportiveness, decisiveness, and confronting conflict, an important one for that particular era. And the 5 cultural elements that organizations actually downplayed in response to the pandemic were customer orientation, individualism, detail orientation, results orientation, and collaboration. Now, the interesting thing for me out of those 5 is that you would expect collaboration to be quite a key component when you are working as disparate organizations. But I think a lot of that came through maybe in the supportiveness aspect of the element that they played up. So the second pattern that emerged was when looking beyond those high-level cultural attributes, it was noted that employees experienced either cultural change positively or cultural change quite negatively. And again, as we mentioned last week, looking at the context of regions, cultures, society, demographic groupings, it's obvious you would get some kind of split in that experience. And moving on, the report references a topic model that was applied to the open-ended text responses to identify if there were any salient cultural themes. And the topics were compared with respondents' reports on whether they experienced the change positively or negatively. And interestingly, again, the only topic that was associated with a net positive experience, Kevin, was that of regular leadership communication, which is great that actually came to the fore, but concerning that there was only one positive attribute coming through. So what was highlighted there is that flexibility didn't emerge as a positive, which I would have thought it would, but possibly because, as we mentioned last week, some of the advantages of not commuting were offset by some of the negatives of working from home in a non-dedicated workspace, noisy family, young ones, helping kids at school and things like that. So topics related to assessing resources, the way employees were communicating and collaborating, and culture change were all associated with negative experiences, which is somewhat concerning. The
Yeah.
third and last pattern to emerge there noted that different employee groups had very different experiences during the organizational changes, which again is expected. But a specific point was made in that non-white participants reported having a much more negative experience of the pandemic and felt less optimistic about the future than did their white participants. And a possible explanation of this is that non-white participants saw the organizational culture post the pandemic as less transparent to what the white participants actually responded. So in closing on those 3 points, Kevin, the key takeaways from the study also highlighted the following trends: that leaders should deliberately evaluate which cultural adaptations have emerged in their organizations since the pandemic and establish if they are functional and can they be a source of strength and innovation for the future. Leaders should also critically examine which cultural elements have been suppressed during the pandemic and how do they get reinforced for the organization to retain its competitive edge. And lastly, there, to navigate the choices, leaders definitely need sophisticated cultural maps of their organizations, including surveys, analysis of internal digital trace data, and further insights into how organizational culture has changed, assess how these employees are talking about the culture on various external platforms and social media. And interesting on that point, I came across an article last night that talks about how Portugal is actually going to implement a law that employees are not allowed to contact their employees after working hours, irrespective of whether it's workday or weekend. So, and in fact, when they're not in office, they're also not allowed to do the trace, login trace and keyboard trace and things like that. So really, I think the behaviors and approach during COVID have highlighted certain other negative issues that organizations, and in this instance, a country, is actually going to apply as a primary law relative to after our work.
So, Craig, I'm so glad that you ended off, sharing the points on leadership, and I think more now than ever before, we're seeing that all roads lead back. Well, many roads
leadership.
to leadership, right? And what are you doing, and how are you doing it, and how are you showing up for your business, and with the impacts and the challenges that we are set up with now. It's a big conversation, and how leaders invariably will show up, and how they're going to take action on the next 12 months. Is going to really, it's going to, I think it's going to showcase significant leadership, or people who are really just stuck in a rut, and they're struggling to move past that. I think leadership as a skill and as a quality is really going to come to the foreground in the next couple of months.
Yeah. I don't know if you can hear the loud lightning and thunder, and hear the lightning, see the lightning, and hear the thunder behind me. So we'll just push on as we go through. But I think, to continue on that point, one of the in our previous conversation on diversity, inclusion, and belonging, again, there it was emphasized that leadership needs to take ownership of that and drive that, particularly during this period of disparate workforces, which, so I think that the next 6 months will really highlight which organizations are either going to excel in that space or actually going to fail and need a leadership change to ensure they can move their business forward correctly.
Absolutely. So, Craig, I know that we were going to have two special guests join us on the show today, but as the calendars are disrupted at times, and between moving house and all these things, we had challenges with the calendar and the options we had. But we are going to have these guests on next week, which is really cool. And I know that you mentioned you met one of the guests in person. We always do everything remotely, but you had an opportunity to meet them. So I'm really keen and eager to hear what that's all about for next week. But on that note, Craig, what is in store for our listeners today?
Yeah, Kevin. So yes, I guess they're definitely prepped and ready for next week, and it's going to be quite great because it is the last recording of the year that we have on the platform. So good to end the year with some guests and show. But I'm going to not expand on that because it really is going to be a good show. So for today, I thought it'd be an opportune time to actually pick up on a thread from last week's conversation but this time addressing the topic of the Great Resignation.
Mm.
And for those who don't know, the Great Resignation is an informal name assigned to a global trend of large numbers of workers leaving their jobs during COVID-19 pandemic. And what's of great interest here, Kevin, is that while we're not seeing the full scale of what's happening globally really come to the fore yet, we are definitely seeing a shift of people moving from full-time employment to contract work, and seeing some of that starting to play out in South Africa, interestingly.
Great. And I'm so glad that we're going to talk about it, because COVID, and I'm not want to have a COVID conversation. What I want to have is a value conversation. Is COVID really pushed that for so many people? What we value, I mean, I'm one of them, what we value, how we value our time, where we spend our time. People's value systems have been tackled in such a big way. And that's why, in my opinion, that's what's really pressing the button here for a lot of people to make different decisions on where they work, how they work, what company they work for, what are their options. I've even heard, some of the stats referring to how people are employed, and whether their recruitment process offers them options to be able to work a flexible work environment. And a lot of millennials, are considering, if that's not an option for me, I'd rather not work with you. I'd rather look for a different company to work with. So people are shifting. People's value systems have changed.
Yeah, and you've hit on some of the key points that actually I'm going to address here. But they, just as we're chatting, and I'm looking at you going, okay, so you didn't experience the Great Resignation, but you've definitely been part of the Great Relocation, which in itself, I haven't seen many topics or articles on that, but there's very much a trend, particularly in our country, where folk are moving to smaller coastal towns and things like that, and getting away from the big bustling cities, where that quality of life is actually the driver of their decision making moving forward. So, in between us ending next week and starting again next year, I'm quite interested to see if there are any articles on the Great Relocation and how these pieces thread together. So, the term the Great Resignation is already in Wikipedia with a whole host of definitions. So that in itself tells you that it's got a lot of substance. And Wiki defines the phenomena as the following. It says that the Great Resignation, also known as the Big Quit, is the ongoing trend of employees primarily in the USA voluntarily leaving their jobs from spring 2021 to the present. Okay, so that is our autumn period. And it's worth noting that the term Great Resignation was probably introduced by Alan Klotz, a professor of management at Mays Business School of Texas A&M University. And he predicted in May 2021 that this mass exodus was imminent. And when you really get to understand the statistics of May, June, July, August, September in the USA, you'll be absolutely horrified to understand the percentage of folk that have left. But let me share some of those alarming stats with you, Kevin, from a range of the reports that I led. So the first one, yes, is data maintained by the US Labor Department shows that more than 34 million American workers quit their jobs in 2021 so far.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah. And the trend's definitely active in Canada, UK, and Germany. Microsoft conducted a really interesting survey in Q1 this year and noted that 41% of the global workforce is likely to consider leaving their current employer within the next year, with 46% planning to make a major pivot or career transition. And that's an interesting point that's highlighted throughout the conversation. But you spoke about millennials. How's this for Gen Z? 54% of Generation Z workers could also be considering resignation, Kevin.
Wow.
Now that in itself is quite alarming, because we're nowhere near the millennial spectrum. We're definitely past the rest. So 54% of our peers, cohorts, and colleagues will be looking to take a different direction. There's an interesting Harvard Business Report that stated that resignation rates were higher among employees who worked in fields that had experienced some extreme increase in demand due to the pandemic, like leading to increased workloads and burnout. And I think a lot of this, call center operators, folk who are really at the back end of picking up the wrath and, constant onslaught of profanities and that from people who weren't getting what they want from deliveries and things like that. I think that entire sector must have taken a huge amount of strain. And there are multiple reasons and causes leading to this trend, Kevin, because COVID definitely allowed workers to rethink their careers. As you were saying, it's allowed them to rethink their working conditions, and it's allowed them to really think long and deep about their long-term goals. And the most common reason cited is that workers are definitely opting for the freedom or flexibility that they experienced during the pandemic to work from home or as the way forward in their careers. And not all the big brands and organizations of the world are going to allow that and are ready to adopt that behavior in their organization, unfortunately. So on that point again, a Harvard Business Report also noted that the decision to quit for many employees would likely have depended on, again, as I mentioned, the likes of the burnout or the high pressure at work, coupled with pay cuts and despondencies arising out of the lack of growth prospects during the pandemic. And I think that's a tough one, because the pandemic would have quelled any growth opportunities across the board. When and how that gets reinstated and what that looks like moving forward for organizations, I don't quite know what it looks like. But health experts and industry watchers have noted a purposeful shift in priorities brought on by the pandemic, with people looking for better job quality that promises greater balance between professional and personal lives and provides the fulfillment in the roles offered. And that balance, referencing the Portuguese article, where businesses actually cannot communicate with their staff after 5 p.m. And I'm stand under correction, but I think that might have been discussed in France some time ago as well, if I'm not mistaken. Many younger workers want a better work-life balance, and the industries that require face-to-face or in-person interaction like retail, leisure, and hospitality have definitely been hit the hardest with resignations. And according to a study conducted by Adobe, the mass resignation trend has been driven by millennials and Gen Z, where it is stated that they are more than likely to be dissatisfied with their work. And alarmingly, more than half Gen Z noted the intent to find a new job within the next year, as I mentioned earlier, 54%. And that's, if 34 million have already left their workplace in 4 or 5 months of the year, I'm dying to know what that number is at the end of the year, Kevin.
Yeah, Craig, I'm not sure you're going to touch on this as well, but one of the articles that I have seen around this is on Forbes that also shared information around up to 40% of employees cited burnout as a top reason for leaving. So, to your point with Portugal putting a law in place, and I think it's a big concern. I think there's a large concern where employers are kind of going, well, you don't have to sit in the traffic, so get on with it. Which I don't think is fair. I don't think it's not conducive to a healthy business.
No, it's not. It's definitely not. I think that if we continue on that vein, we are just going to absolutely quell the last bit of spirit and positivity and opportunity for employees. And definitely, if we thought 54 was high, it's going to be 60, 70% before we know it. And leaders and organizations really need to adapt and understand what they need to do to fix their businesses to ensure that that doesn't continue.
So, I mean, Craig, while this is all seems to be gloom and doom, what is it that leaders can take from the situation and being cognizant of moving forward?
Yeah, Kevin, there's a lot that they can learn from the articles. And interestingly, I'm actually referencing a Forbes article in this particular aspect of the conversation. So I came across a lot that speak about leaders in these situations and whether they actually use this information to effectively rebuild better businesses that meet the varying needs of their employees into more sustainable business in the long run. That's still to be seen. But the article, brace yourself for the great revolution, listen to me, brace yourself for the great resignation, A Note to Leaders, was published by Kieran Mann on the 1st of November and found on Forbes.com. And this article covers in great depth what the Great Resignation is all about, and it provides some great insights into the observations of the various studies undertaken on the topic. So the author notes that traditionally a large number of people quitting their jobs used to be seen as a positive sign. But as it demonstrated that the economy was strong, plenty of job opportunities, and that's actually quite sensible when you read it like that. But definitely, these are not normal times, and the current resignation wave is nothing like that of the past. So the key points in the article highlighting why the Great Resignation are noted as follows. There's some overlaps with one or two of the points I mentioned earlier, but there are definitely a couple of really great new points for leaders to be aware of as they rebuild their future fit businesses, or as we hope they build their future fit businesses. So why the Great Resignation now? So the first point here is quite obvious. Salary cuts, businesses being shut down. The pandemic definitely presented huge financial challenges for most employees, and many needed to find new opportunities to regain their place in life. And I think the place in life, I added that in because it's an important piece of the psyche and psychology of the well-being of employees as well. And, financial wellness is one thing, but mental wellness is really vital, and finding your place in life is part of that mental wellness aspect as well. The pandemic resignation backlog, and this was a really interesting point for me, because I wondered why in 5 months, there were 34 million resignations. Well, many employees resisted resigning during the early stage of the pandemic, Kevin, due to the uncertainty that they had, and obviously to ensure that they had some form of income and supposed security during that period. And evidence of this in the UK is that there are apparently 6 million fewer resignations in 2020 compared to 2029. 6 million fewer in 2020, whilst we're going through what some of the biggest challenges in the world. And that backlog really is part and parcel of
that's insane.
Spewing out here. So many who wanted to quit their jobs, obviously decided to remain employed so that they could at least navigate through that uncertainty, and that therefore created that backlog in resignations, which has now been actioned. And literally, it's like, the funnel opening and it's being spewed out. The other interesting point here is uncertainty, which is a breeding ground for opportunity. So about 60%, again, another big statistic, 60% of workers in the UK are still considering a career change. And many are rethinking and reevaluating life and career choices due to the uncertainty the pandemic brought. But interestingly, many are actually pursuing their hobbies over their jobs, with many others actually considering learning new skills and starting an entirely new career direction. And the uncertainty, in essence, to quote the article, is becoming a breeding ground of opportunity for several professionals, and many employers are facing the brunt of this.
Great. I love these points. And I think, even to the point of uncertainty, I wrote a short blog post on this, which I shared, the certainty of uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
And really getting your brain wrapped around it. And I think as much as there has been this uncertainty, it has been the opportunity for people to be innovative, to really come up with solutions they never thought were possible, or even knew that they could do in that time frame. And we've discussed that too. So I think as much as uncertainty creates a lot of uneasiness and volatility in business itself, it really does force behavior change. And as you sort of mentioning these points, to me, what stands out above it, because I'm passionate about humans and behavior, it's sort of like this big movement of how we do life, right? And I think it's so interesting and fascinating to hear stats supporting this, because it's really picking up on how people are actually literally changing their behaviors and considering how they do their lives day to day because of this.
Yeah, and I think, so again, they're becoming a breeding ground of great opportunity. The energy of the planet is going to change positively, I believe, on the back of if there's enough groundswell for us to be moving forward in respect of the right movements, the right actions, the right messages. No more fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And just changing the dynamic of thinking and self-purpose and those things. I think eventually that will filter into a good energy for the planet. And let's hope it happens quickly. Then you address all the other dreadful issues that COP26 didn't resolve. Yeah.
And Mother Nature intervened, and she's like, "Guys, you need to change this. We need to fix this, right?" But I'm glad. So there are recurring themes, Craig, and picking up on last week's conversation, the workplace culture is obviously at risk, right? So, what can you tell us about this in this regard?
Yeah, definitely. The workplace culture, as I mentioned, one of the key topics that's close to my heart. So it is a great point, and workplace culture is always going to be impacted on when staff leave, Kevin, and especially when they leave en masse. In the same article, Brace Yourself for the Great Resignation: A Note to Leaders, again, is published by Kieran Mann. She touches on the topic of workplace culture and notes the following points. So, workplace culture, a catalyst to the movement. So while employees tried desperately to deal with uncertainty during the pandemic, Kevin, organizations were definitely caught off guard, and this is quite apparent, with many managers and leaders trying to tackle the problems, but actually without any structures in place, and in many instances just actually lacking in skills and competencies to overcome these challenges. And this is the first time that our generation has been faced with this kind of a dilemma, and organizations and leaders are ill-equipped to actually understand what the hell this actually means, let alone deal with it. So catalyst to the movement. There are also some of the signs where organizational culture was impacted on, or where lack of cohesive organizational culture existed, and the consequences here were absolutely exponential. So let's look at 3 points here. Lack of recognition. So some organizations offered awards to their employees for perseverance during this time. Great. But really what was missing in those instances is a good, routine, systematic employee recognition program. So it's really just about putting a plaster on certain areas without actually understanding the net impact and how to bring a program through the entire organization with sustainability, longevity of what it can actually mean for that business. Professional relationships mattered more than ever. A recent Development and Dimension International study, DDI, they reported that as much as 57% of employees quit because of their boss. And it's a staggering figure. It really is. But in the wake of all of the pressures and negativity, it was probably easier to just put your foot forward, make your statement, and head out there, because the consequences and possible negative reputational issues were actually just going to get lost in the mess with everybody else doing the same thing. Yeah. The best place to work are not necessarily the ones that offer the highest salaries or the ones with the most attractive office interiors. These are actually the companies where people have a trusting relationship with their managers and leaders. And this we spoke about last week when we looked at the diversity, impact, inclusion proposition as well. Yeah. And the third point here was lack of employee engagement. And again, an obvious statement, but nevertheless 100% true, Kevin. Disengaged employees are not productive, and they're definitely going to look for work elsewhere. So while the article provided, so you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, Craig, I'm working with a large insurance company at the moment where we're dealing with the managers as well, and or people in leadership at least. And as much as the disengagement is happened, and it's an obvious evil that's sort of come with working remotely. There's a strong awakened sort of a consciousness and a cognitive awareness around how do I actively now get involved and connect with the people I'm working with.
Great.
Much as the remote work has sort of interrupted communication and connection, and even your performance. What's interesting about it is people have really started pushing the agenda of, what, I'm dealing with a human. I need to speak to this human and see how they're doing, which is also another side sort of outcome from what working remotely, the COVID, and all of this has really given us.
Yeah, that personal relationship aspect really is key there.
Yeah.
Definitely is. But building on that, then, so while the article provided insights into common signs of high turnover organizations, there are a couple of great headlines that I believe are important for leaders to consider when restructuring their workplace culture into one that, Kevin, is engaging, that's encouraging, and that actually empowers all staff within those organizations. So a couple of points here, four or 5 points. So flexibility is essential. We're at the point now where I think it's going to be very hard for every organization to reinstate the in-office, face-to-face, everyday tradition of going back to work. That ain't going to happen. Flexibility, hybrid workforce, days off, days away is definitely the de facto standard moving forward. Another key thing for them to look out for is review the compensation and other benefits spectrum. The learnings around time off, financial compensation, setting up technology at home to help work better. All of those layers are really, really important for staff. So leaders need to take cognizance of that. And then here's one that you and I really like and talk about quite a bit, is the empathetic leadership. So the need for empathetic leadership. We've covered this point a number of times, but just to reiterate for our listeners, empathetic leadership is the ability to lead while understanding the context, the experiences, and the needs of others, and being aware of their thoughts and feelings. And it's the ability to actually live and experience the story of someone else as if it was actually your own. And then the last point there was building a happy organization to get past the Great Resignation. And I really like this point, Kevin. In fact, I actually want to quote from the last paragraph, because there's something really positive that comes out of it as one of the 5 points. So let me quote on this. As the world recovers from the after effects of the pandemic, people want to be happy. They want to be valued. They want to be respected, and they want to be empowered and encouraged now more than ever. Leadership plays a critical role in helping these employees achieve this objective and improve their quality of life, while also providing them with an unbeatable reason to stick around. This wave of resignations could be an excellent opportunity for leaders to realign their corporate values and focus more on their employees and workplace cultures to build happy organizations.
Yeah.
It's long live the happy organization. It's just it's a wonderful opportunity for the recalibration and to set the intent in place as organizations move forward.
But I mean, Craig, there's no coincidence that you look at companies that do have a happy, healthy culture, whether they're working remotely or not, that they're successful. There's no like ifs or buts about it. When you have that solid foundation, when you have a solid, strong value system, when you know the culture and you live the culture, and it supports people and outcomes and driving. I mean, we spoke to a new company that's looking at leadership. One of the things that they do is they just share their calendars with each other. The leadership team have all shared calendars, so that in my calendar, I can say, you know what, I'm going to pick up my kids now, so I'm not available between this time and this time. They've got to a flexibility in their organization where that's a consideration, right? And happy, healthy, flourishing company. And I'm like, there's obvious indicators of why. Like it's if we start paying attention to it more actively, it becomes a real obvious tool set that you can actually implement.
And what I like about the open calendars is that comes on the back of a foundation of trust.
Yeah.
And but firstly, Kevin, when there's shared common purpose, everybody's leaning in the right direction. Everybody's going in the right direction with the same intent. The end result may be different from me to you or the next person, but we understand what that journey is, and we understand our constituent roles as a collective in driving it there. So when that's in place, the organizational culture is entrenched, the trust is in place. It's obvious when that's in place, you've got your diversity, inclusion, and belonging aspects taken care of. There's no reason that a business shouldn't be able to move forward in the right purposeful way then.
Yeah. It's and yet big large organizations still struggle with this to such a degree. They just don't get it right, and it's a case of going, well, it's back to basics. It's basic principles of having a great business. There's a certain fundamental that needs to be met.
Yeah, and businesses are made up of people, and I think so many people forget the people in their businesses.
Yeah. Craig, so as we near the end of our show, what are the key points that we can take away for the listeners today?
Kevin, thanks. So key points come from a great article that I came across on TowsWatson.com, and you probably know Towers Watson quite well. The article is titled "Transforming the Great Resignation into the Great Hire," and I really like the flip into the positive space. It was published by John M. Bremen on the 2nd of August, and the opening headline of the article notes the following: "In the midst of the Great Resignation, net talent gainers are playing both talent offensive and defensive by creating an environment where people want to be, this prompting the great hire." Which, yeah. So let's just start by actually putting a bit of context to what the great, at least what the net talent gainers are, because there's a lot of terminology here that is new for some of our listeners. So quoting from the third paragraph of the article, it provides some of the context to the term net talent gainers. It describes the actions and future-seeking leaders take to be net talent gainers in the current environment. They hire more employees than they lose, and they focus on why people join and stay, as well as why they leave. In addition, they create value propositions and employee experiences to drive success, setting the organization apart by considering flexibility as an advantage, transforming pay and benefits, aligning well-being, resiliency and work, and reinforcing culture, values, and purpose. And those are we've almost rattled all of those off in our conversation. And when you get the leaders who actually have all of that in place and construct the operations of the business around that, those are the businesses that become the net talent gainers.
Yeah.
So they're all essentially drivers in building effective and belonging organizations, Kevin. And in this article, it covered four key points or actions that the net talent gainers are adopting to build better organizations and to differentiate themselves and gain the competitive advantage in the marketplace. So the actions are noted as follows, as the takeaway. Point one is to maximize the value of in-person interaction. So while in-person interaction may be less frequent in a world of hybrid and remote work, net talent gainers understand and convey its value when it occurs. And some of the anecdotes from the leaders hosting first meetings for workers since the onset of the pandemic reported unanticipated levels of energy, connection, inclusion, focus, creative productivity, insight and innovation from employees who are together for the first time in over a year. And it was interesting because in one of the articles that I read, one of the pieces that really stood out for me there was an employer just noting that it's the first meeting that they were in where nobody tested the audio, the screen. They were able to just look at each other and know that they were in that environment. Is your sound on? Is your sound off? Is your video on? Is your video off? All vitally important aspects. So some workers still do feel anxious about the potential risk of travel and being in person, but they do report a sense of elation from being in the meetings themselves, Kevin. Leadership point. Leaders make in-person meetings meaningful and valuable and don't take them for granted. Great. So Kevin, the second point here is understand that on-site workers need flexibility too. So an interesting statistic is that approximately 1/3 of the global workforce remained on-site for essential in-person job activities during the pandemic. And I didn't realize it was as high as that. And future-seeking leaders learned that these workers value flexibility as much as remote workers. The net gainers have learned the value of flexibility, shift schedules, has applicability to all workers, whether on-site, remote, or hybrid. And the importance of when people work can be as important as where people work. So whether you're working morning, afternoon, late shifts versus home, hybrid, office, those those components are actually equally weighted in a net gainer environment. The net talent gainers also provide benefits to employees such as time off, providing caregiving support, providing flexible healthcare, and importantly, emotional well-being benefits and financial well-being. And the net talent gainers focused on workload and skill development and providing the technologies that enable work to be more flexible, to the point that I've got mates who live in London, where their organizations actually came to their homes and set up entire work rooms with every single layer of technology that they needed, just so that they could be effective and in a good sense and mind space when they were working.
Yeah.
The third point here is seek to see and hear and understand. This lesson definitely is the most points to take note of, because they're incredibly aligned with the notion of inclusion and belonging, which again is really key in getting the culture of this new workforce in place. So the net talent gainers reported that after flexibility, employees most value being heard, being seen, and being understood by their leaders.
Yeah.
The pandemic extracted high emotional toll in employees all around the world, with research reporting that many feeling isolated, detached, distracted, and overwhelmed, as we mentioned earlier. But the ensuing social disruption in many countries also polarized employees, leaving many expressing a feeling of marginalization and a lack of dignity. And that's an important point to understand. And I want to quote this point in full, Kevin. It reveals much about how employees are actually feeling. So, reduced travel, remote work, and shuttered social institutions created further detachment and lack of understanding across geographies and demographic groups. Leaders who engage employees through regular listening, formal and informal, acknowledgement of needs and concerns, and communication that they see, hear, and understand employees through empathy, compassion, and dignity, not only experienced higher levels of attraction and retention, but also reported higher levels of engagement, productivity, innovation, and performance. The fourth and final point is create an environment of physical and psychological safety. So net talent gainers understood the importance of the workplace, of the physical safety, but also ensured that the psychological safety was there during the pandemic. And now they are hearing how the employees continue to value these attributes, and that many actually chose an employer based on their perceptions of the safety in culture and practice. And again, a clear indication of the sense of belonging and inclusion there. And Kevin, employees were physically safe and treated with respect in the environment, free from marginalization, discrimination, harassment, etc., report great ability to actually be themselves, enabling that organization to attract talent from a broader pool, and were able to address work-related stress and increase retention. So I want to conclude on those 4 points by quoting the closing statements of the article. While labor markets remain disrupted, actions of future-seeking leaders help turn their organizations into net talent gainers, restoring stability and positioning them for more favorable post-pandemic operations.
Amazing, Greg. Yeah, I love that you've shared this with us today, and just listening to these 4 key points that you take away from this. I think it's so valuable to have this conversation. I'm touching on that point again of seeing how behaviors are changing and how we're doing business and how we can do it better. I think it's fascinating to see that the world is in like a literal changing process of changing how we do business, and it's fascinating. But Craig, I think that to reframe it, the Great Resignation to the Great Hire, I think that's fantastic.
It is.
Where's the opportunities? Where the opportunities are HRs and the recruiters and the leaders of the world really stepping up the game and kind of going, okay, well, if it is a Great Resignation, it means there's a whole bunch of people we could potentially employ. Like, let's get on with it, right? I think it's a good reframe.
And the net talent gainer statement and phrase itself is really one I think is not understood well enough and not used well enough in corporate work.
Absolutely, absolutely. Craig, so just to finish off, I mean, this is what our second last show. This is the second last. How many have we done this year?
I think today's 44, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, next week will be 45. We'll close the year out at 45 shows. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, Craig. You you are spectacular, and I love that we could do this.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah, it's been great doing this with you.
And we're going to have a great ending of the year as well, with a great brand who's going to come showcase some really important stuff. So, what do we have lined up for next week's show?
Yeah, Kevin. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we've got two special guests confirmed for next week. Our guests are Prad Dabe, who's the managing director and co-founder of Ground One Coffee, and Letty Mailula, who's his director and co-founder. I actually had a chance of meeting Prad in person because I really wanted to get to understand the flavor of their coffee. Beautiful coffee, really, really is. And they are one of the 12 companies that were selected in the Hollard Insurance's Big Ads for Small Businesses campaign. And it was just wonderful listening to Prad talk about the journey and seeing himself on billboards for the first time. And they get to share that journey with us tomorrow. And I must tell you that they've got themselves a business with great potential. And again, thanks to Hollard Insurance for seeing the value in these businesses and giving these 12 businesses a foot up.
Absolutely, and being part of our show and being willing to share this with us and showcase this, it's such an honor, and I'm really eager to hear all about it. Craig, thank you so much. Thanks for today, guys. If you want to catch Lunchtime Marketing segment, it happens every Thursday at 12 on ebersradio.com. Craig, have a great week. I'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week. Thanks, Kevin. Bye.
Cheers for now.